Gabagool, forget about it. Story 1. Fourth generation here who knows absolutely nothing about Italy but looks Italian and has a very Italian last name. Buongiorno. In all seriousness, the reason is that everyone else calls me Italian despite me being a mixed American of various backgrounds. My girlfriend, now wife, casually referred to our interracial relationship because she didn't think I was white. I almost fell over in the Costco parking lot. I was laughing so hard. So I might as well own it. What on earth am I supposed to do? Pick an argument every single time someone calls me Italian. Story 2. I'm third generation Sicilian. I have a pretty basic Caucasian blend look, but one sibling and my mother don't. Growing up, I was fortunate enough to be close to a whole community of the first generation brothers and sisters, their spouses and kids. That first generation tended not to marry out, so there were a lot of comments and joking from both sides of my family about being almost or mostly either white or Sicilian. The older generation, many of them born in the early 1900s, kept much of the culture and foodways, but they were so busy becoming American and ensuring their children were becoming American that a lot of the language was lost, and our family culture was less the culture of Italy and more the culture of being from a family of immigrants. The second generation pretty much abandoned the language beyond different sayings or just a handful of words. Things like calling someone cucuza when they do something stupid or bringing the family to the table with manja tended to linger, but only a few of my parents' generation kept the language, and those tended to be from the ones who married other second-generation Sicilians. Very few of them kept the foodways, too. I mean, why should they? Their parents were still very much alive, and nobody cooks better than your mother, right? At that time, we still had huge family reunion gatherings where folks told stories and kept traditions alive. There's a lot of pride in being Sicilian, but it had little to do with pretending to be Italian or adopting some kind of understanding about Italian culture. In fact, I have a clear memory of a wooden spoon on the back of my hand when I referenced being Italian rather than Sicilian. That first generation tended to also be the ones who, as the first group born as American citizens, went to war against Italy. My great-grandfather didn't become an American citizen until his sons enlisted in World War II, and my great-grandmother never did. I imagine they had their own reasons for focusing on their new home and guiding their own children toward assimilation. With Japanese Americans being rounded up and put into internment camps, being an easily identifiable cultural minority had some risks. As the first generation began to die off and the family spread even further, there was a wraparound as my generation of cousins scrambled to hold onto the things that were inevitably lost to time. A lot of deep dives into records and attention to genealogy. Many of us went back to our grandmother's kitchens to learn how to make and grow and do. Our last big family reunion was a celebration of the journey from Palermo 100 years prior, bringing together family from all over the country. They told stories, listened to the last wavering voices of great aunts and uncles who remembered their parents in those first years off the boat while little fourth and fifth generation kids of so many different outward racial and cultural appearances ran around playing. Hopefully, they grow up being proud of and honoring the journey that brought them to where they are now. It was also the last time my generation got together. We're just too many and too far spread out. By now, the language is almost all gone in my family, and the culture of Italy, if such a thing ever actually existed, has evolved over the decades into the culture of a family descended from Sicilian immigrants. There's still a lot of pride in that identity, even if it looks a bit like life copying fictional media characterizations. Story 3. Because being an Italian-American in an Italian-American community is a distinct cultural identity in the United States. For example, eating dinner with an Italian-American family from New Jersey offers a very different experience than dining with a Polish-American family in Chicago or an Irish-American family in Boston. We are not all just homogeneous Americans. Those ancestral identities actually matter, at least within the communities that have retained those identities. They might not seem Italian to you, but their Italian cultural heritage is a useful way of distinguishing themselves from other Americans. Story 4. Most American ethnic groups do this. It's not something special that only Italian Americans do. Mexican, Haitian, Chinese, Puerto Rican, Jewish, Irish, Indian, and other Americans all have large numbers of their population that add an ethnic identifier. Part of this is because of the discrimination they faced when first arriving here. In the case of Italians and Irish, it was their Catholicism that really irritated the native-born American Protestants and opened them up to all manner of ridicule and mistreatment. Black Americans do a similar thing in the form of Pan-Africanism and Black Power narratives. If you find yourself born and raised in America and you are different from the majority, then strength in numbers is a good bet for survival. Story 5. When a European says, "I'm Italian," with all the context of coming from a continent full of ethnostates, they mean that not only were they born and raised in Italy immersed in Italian culture, but usually that their family going back for a significant time was as well. When an American says, "I'm Italian," with all the context of being in a hodgepodge continent where most people know when their family was somewhere else, they mean that Italy is the somewhere else with the biggest and usually most recent impact on their family. These are wildly different statements due to very different cultural contexts. The conflict comes when one tries to evaluate the other with their own definition. Americans don't mean what Europeans mean when they say that, and Europeans who care will never be anything but disappointed or confused unless they accept that and interpret it as it was meant. Story 6. In general, I think most non-Americans underestimate how much many Americans like to be part of their ancestry. Our country isn't all that old, and many of us have grandparents who were treated differently because of what part of Europe they or their parents came from, causing them to group together with similar people. That's why there are Italian, Polish, Jewish, or Irish neighborhoods in a lot of places in the United States. That sort of cultural isolation led to people being proud of their ethnicity, even in the face of adversity. Give it a generation or two, and you have people who are still proud but have no reason to know the original language or know much about the modern country that their ancestors came from a long time ago. In that sense, I think it's helpful to think of these people as distinct subcultures. These aren't Americans claiming to be Italian. They are Americans claiming to be Italian Americans. My city has a large Scandinavian population, and we have an annual midsummer festival. Story 7. Europeans complain about this, but then have zero issue calling my fourth-generation Japanese American self Japanese, or my US-born and raised Chinese American significant other Chinese. We have more in common with an Italian-American person than any Japanese or Chinese person from those countries, but an Italian-American person likely has very different home cooking, family traditions, holidays, and religious traditions than we do. What language are we supposed to use to denote those differences then? Story 8. My dad is genetically fully Chinese, but he's about fifth-generation American and doesn't know the language or culture of China. But I bet you'd still call him Chinese because he looks Chinese. You think American means white. Story 9. Because they are ethnically Italian. They are not claiming to be Italian citizens. Italian Americans have their own culture that they are proud of. I will never understand why this bothers you all so much. Do not you all have any real problems? Story 10. I remember reading somewhere that when immigrants from different cultures immigrate to the United States, the first to disappear is the language, and the last to disappear is the food. By the second or third generation, most will not speak the language. However, the food still remains. Many Italian Americans are in the fifth or sixth generation here and do not speak the language. But there are so many prominent Italian restaurants and family recipes that remain. Story 11. I am very amused at the number of Europeans in this thread outing themselves as ethnicity or race purists. It makes me wonder if all their complaining about the United States is just them projecting. Story 12. I think it's common to want to connect with your heritage. I'm a typical American mutt by now. All my great-grandparents came to the United States in the late 1800s and early 1900s. I have English, Dutch, Welsh, German, and Polish in my background, but my last name is obviously Polish. We have found the immigration records from when my great-grandfather came through Ellis Island in 1906. It's fun to embrace that history, but I just consider myself American. Also, I love a good Polish joke, haha. Story 13. Why does it matter? You don't live in America anyway. If their subculture of American life is influenced by the people they grew up with, let them call themselves that. Story 14. Why do you care? Why do only white Americans get criticized for wanting a connection to their heritage? Does it hurt anyone for them to do this? Your question just raises more questions. Story 15. Because several of the currently white ethnicities were not considered white back in the time of immigration, This led to isolated subcultures of Italians, Irish, Greeks, and others, where pride in their origins and ancestry was a community binding point for people who found themselves in a nation that rejected them. Though things have changed since, the cultural infrastructure remains. This also isn't necessarily a bad thing. Having a connection to your family ancestry is part of understanding the story of you, how you got here, and can even help inform you of where you're going. Can be a touchstone in hard times as well. Sometimes when my life is at a low point, I think about what my family had to do and did to survive or thrive and remember that what was in them is in me too. Yes, that ancestral connection is indeed divorced from the actual current state of the origin nations, but that's not really important. This is also why there are LGBTQ communities, by the way, not related to race, but their orientation led to isolation and the subsequent formation of a subculture. Story 16. I don't know why Europeans don't understand why we drop the hyphenated American thing when we're talking about our ancestry. All Americans are already on the same page. When an Italian American says he's Italian, no one thinks he's actually from Italy. He's obviously referring to his ancestry. You'd think Europeans were aliens the way they struggle to decipher a basic societal quirk that isn't their own. Story 17. I think the deeper root question is, why does it bother you? How does it impact your life so that you have a negative outlook on this or others instead of just letting go? That being said, I believe it's just an identity crisis and how people perceive us. I'm German, Swedish, and Finnish. In Germany, I'm the Nordic. In Scandinavia, I'm the German. I assume it's the same for others, and then you just embrace that title. Story 18. I'm second-generation Italian, and there are several reasons why we do this. It's rare to find anyone in America that is 100% anything. At least according to Ancestry, I'm 98% Southern Italian. My grandparents, like many others, lived in a neighborhood that was mostly other Italian immigrants, so some of the culture carried on. I also grew up in that same neighborhood, and my Catholic elementary school was mostly Italian with a few Portuguese kids included for good measure. Some nuances carried over even in grade school. I have an obviously Italian last name, and I look Italian. I am proud of my heritage. That being said, I am sad that my grandparents assimilated so well. No one in my family spoke Italian around us, and I never picked up the language. My understanding is it was frowned upon to look like a greenhorn. Story 19. Because the United States is a country with a culture of extreme individualism, anything that can make one seem unique, special, and not like other boys and girls will be used for this purpose. No, John Whiteman, being 1/32nd Italian and 1/64th Cambodian makes you neither Italian nor Cambodian. You are an American, bearer of American culture and American values. Story 20. Funny how, as Americans, we're told we stole the land, we're not actually Americans, and to go back to where we came from. But we're also not allowed to embrace our heritage, where our ancestors are from. So what would you like us to be? Story 21. At one point in United States history, Italian immigrants were generally treated poorly by the rest of the Americans. As with most immigrant groups, this caused them to stick together and develop a close network of Italian Americans in order to get by. Current descendants grew up in this subculture. Story 22. Italian American here. We aren't pretending. We are of Italian descent. We're proud of our ancestors, our genetics, and where we are originally from. I don't think people understand that when we say Italian, we mean DNA and many customs and cultural practices. We aren't saying we're literally born and presently living in Italy and are just as equal as someone that is. We very much understand and are proud that we're American. We also understand that Italian American is obviously going to be different than being born and raised in Italy. America is a land of immigrants, and I don't think anyone should lose touch with where their family came from and what they are. Many of the customs and the culture that we still practice very much still derives from Italy, with an American twist, of course. As far as the language, this is something that people always give many of us grief for. But many people in my family know Italian. For families that don't, it was encouraged to strictly learn English when they came here. That's why they don't know Italian. Otherwise, they all would. It's not something in their control. There was a lot of anti-Italian racism in America back then, and Italian immigrants wanted to be as respectful as possible to the existing English culture. That's why a lot dropped the Italian language. You can't hold that against them. As far as citizenship, any one of us could get Italian citizenship if we wanted it. For instance, Lionel Messi, the famed football player, is an Italian Argentine. He could get Italian citizenship if he wanted it. Italy wanted him to even play for the national team. There is one Argentinian Italian and one Brazilian Italian on the team, currently. Italy recognizes blood Italians, regardless of what country they were born and currently live in, as just as Italian as them. So that should tell you a lot. The reason you don't understand it is because you don't live here. Many American people of different ethnicities are the same way. Greeks, Irish, Polish, Serbs, Croats. It's no different. It's just a way to differentiate from them and recognize the different nuances of those other American groups. And also some similarities too. Many more important things in life to be concerned over. I also see that you're Italian by other comments in here. Instead of being divisive, you should be welcoming to your fellow blood brother. I have many Greek friends, and the ones that live in Greece never pull this kind of stuff on the Greek American ones that live here. Maybe you should learn something from our empire cousins. We get it. You're way higher on the Italian totem pole. We very much understand this and always have. Here is your trophy. Happy? I'm also going to be out in a large American city rocking my Italy football jersey today. Just for you. Andiamo ragazzi. Forza Azzurri. We're going to keep that Euro Cup.